At its very core, drug science must remain independent. This means we don't accept sponsorships. It's with the support of the drug science community we're able to do this and make the podcast in the first place. If you're able to become a drug science community member and support the show, you too will be supporting the dissemination of evidence-based drug policies. Without you, none of this would be possible. For anybody interested, there's a link in the show notes. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the Drug Science Podcast with me, David Nutt. Here we're bringing together experts and activists for a rational, honest and informed conversation about drugs.
Hello and welcome to the Drug Science Podcast with me, Jo Neal, and Dr. Hannah Thurger. Today we have a very special guest, Josh Dugdale. Now, Josh is the owner of a 4,000-acre estate, the Wasing Estate, and he is also the son of a baronet. And I'm pretty sure that's a first for the Drug Science Podcast. And I read today that he is called the Mindful Aristocrat, and I really liked that. I thought that's really, really nice. So welcome, Josh.
Hi, Jo. Great to be on the podcast. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, Josh.
Lovely. I think our listeners are going to love this one, Josh. And I thought we'd start by talking about your sort of early life, your early career, your degree in economics, and kind of how that sort of shaped or led you to have a career in filmmaking and making documentaries.
Well, I left school age 18 and took a year out and went traveling. I spent a lot of time in Brazil and I saw sort of lots of fascinating things, and I knew that I was off to university at Manchester to study economics, but it definitely gave me a taste for a different country, and especially in South America. And so when I went to Manchester, I spent 3 years studying economics in an environment in the early 90s where Manchester wasn't the easiest place to be. I mean, there were a lot of gangs. The clubs were under a lot of pressure to shut down, and the university lifestyle was very much between trying to sort of burn the candle at both ends. And so this sort of combination, I suppose, gave me a sense of maybe being a bit streetwise, and it made me excited about discovering other places. So when I left Manchester, the first thing that I did was I took a camera and went to Cuba. And that started my career as a filmmaker.
Excellent. And I mean, Hannah and I have been or are at Manchester University. So we're really interested in your Manchester experience. Was that Hacienda days, the 90s?
It was the Hacienda days, yeah. In our final year, all the clubs got closed. And so, we had the Paradise Factory, the Hacienda and Home. And, we sort of really cut our teeth. And PSV in Moss Side as well. That was one. I mean, I remember going to PSV and, there were gang members on the stage firing guns into the roof of the club. I mean, it was a real sort of shock, actually, just to sort of come into that environment. But I definitely sort of strengthened my resolve, and actually was very helpful later in filmmaking because I spent quite a bit of time in America, and we go to places like the projects in Chicago and, some quite difficult places in Los Angeles and Tijuana and other places where, you had to sort of not look terrified. And Manchester taught me not to look terrified, even if I was terrified. Yeah. So it did me a service.
I would say, that's a great skill.
I think Manchester changed a bit by the time that I started probably studying there. The clubs were very different. And there's still some fantastic clubs, and obviously the nightlife there is really great. I think it's the reason lots of students choose there. I don't suppose you ever went on to make a film on nightlife or on rave culture at all?
No, I never did, actually. I left Manchester in 96, and my final memory, actually, was in the summer of 96. And I was living in the centre of Manchester, and that was the year of the bomb. And I saw the bomb blow up.
Whoa.
About 300, 400 meters away from the cloud. And I just saw this huge cloud. The windows in my apartment blew out. So, and that was a big moment for Manchester, I think, because that's when it changed. And they spent a huge amount of money redeveloping the city centre. So my end to Manchester was the moment when that happened. And so it may have been, a new chapter was heading Manchester's way after that. And funny enough, I never did make anything about nightlife or rave culture, actually.
Yeah. Heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And we kind of have a similar situation in the UK now, and we didn't in those days, with county lines and children being groomed, and it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's really difficult. And the war on drugs is, in my view, clearly not worked. And there has to be another way. But, there are some very strong pressure groups who are, lobbying against changing, the policies that exist at the moment. And it's my understanding that actually, there are some quite strong alcohol businesses that lobby very hard on this issue.
And I guess the fact that psychedelics work for alcohol use disorder isn't really information that the alcohol companies are that keen to hear.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't work with their business model.
No.
And I think it's a real tragedy. And you see this sort of system, and you kind of really wonder how it can be that people who work in companies where they do have this commercial interest to try and maximize the profits of their companies, and I'm sure they get home to their families in the evenings, and whether they sort of really understand the issues or think the problem's through. The same thing with big oil. I think it's another massive systemic problem.
So I know that you've been interested in more positive lobbying, so advocacy work, and you've been involved with the psilocybin access rights campaign. How did you end up getting involved with that?
Well, it's a long story. So one of the things when I got back to Wasing, which is the family home that I inherited from my mother, and it's a sort of farm, it's a sizable farm just outside Reading, we started putting on events. And it was through doing these events that, we used to put on festivals. We held a big dance music festival called Glade from 2004 to 2008. And that sort of, I suppose, put me in a situation where I could see the benefit of events and bringing people together for certain, for really positive reasons, dancing and communing and having a good time. And eventually it led me down a path where I had my first plant medicine experience in 2016, where I drank ayahuasca with an Amazonian tribe called the Huni.
And Josh, had you connected with them on your year in Brazil?
No, but I did feel very connected to them as a result of that. And I do also remember in Carnival, when I was 18, drinking something which was called the Pau de Indio, which was this purple substance. And I didn't know what it was, but I was told it was very powerful. Anyway, I drank it, and the next thing I knew, I'd woken up sort of 10 hours later, and I had quite an extraordinary experience. And it may have been that was ayahuasca, but, a long time ago. Anyway, forward fast to 2016, and I meet the Huni Queen and drink ayahuasca with them, which is the most extraordinary experience for those people who have drunk ayahuasca and sat with the grandmother. It can be, life-changing. And so it was for me. It was like turning a key in a door and, seeing things very, very differently, giving me a very strong connection to nature, giving me a sense of where we come from, giving me a sense of what I'm supposed to be doing, my purpose in life, giving me a sense of meaning and direction. And also a really strong physical healing experience as well. I remember feeling my body being scanned. It was almost like meeting the medicine for the first time and having every part of my body looked at. And I could feel the energy in my head and in my organs. And, spent a bit of time in each area. And I remember them as happens in these ceremonies, purging and, being sick. And in those purges, it felt like it was taking some of the cells that had been created perhaps under duress or in stressful situations and getting rid of what may have been traumatic experiences. So there was this sort of physical and emotional connection with, getting rid of some things that just didn't serve me. So I went through this experience and came out and, I was really blown away. Felt fantastic afterwards. Had some visions during the ceremony, which, were very strong and gave me a sense of understanding things that were happening elsewhere, which I then found out later to be true. So to me, this was proof of a very extraordinary medicine. And I then went on a bit of a journey, which actually took me to the Amazon and resulted in coming back and starting a festival with a number of other people called Medicine Festival. So we started this festival and in the pandemic in 2020. And I was very nervous about plant medicine because I think, people don't understand or certainly didn't then. I think now things have changed a bit. And so it was all sorts of different forms of medicine, but probably most importantly, medicine and community bring people together. And it really sort of took off, actually. We got through the pandemic. We were the only festival to take place in the pandemic.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. That must have been difficult.
Yeah, it was really extraordinary, actually, because it happened in that week just before the return of the kids to school in the autumn term. And so we somehow managed to get central government to put out a press release. I don't know how this happened, but they put out a press release saying we really encourage festivals like medicine festivals.
Wow.
And every festival that had tried to go ahead had been turned down by the local authority because they were so nervous, understandably.
Yeah.
A super spreader event. But what happened as a result of central government saying that the medicine festival should go ahead was the local authority suddenly had cover and that they could go ahead. And so that happened. So that was, a sort of big moment. And then since then it grew. And so did our confidence in talking about difficult issues. So after the pandemic, I found myself invited by Ali Bina as was Rebel Wisdom at the time. And he's a journalist. He writes on psychedelics to a meeting in Parliament, which was held by the Psilocybin Access Rights Group. And Tara Austin, Timmy Davis were talking about their work in psychedelics. And I thought maybe I could help. So that's how I became part of the campaigning group.
So Josh, can you tell us a bit more about the origin of the Medicine Festival? Where did it come from and how did it evolve?
Yes. Well, a friend of mine, Ben Christie, came up with the idea of calling a festival medicine after sitting with an indigenous tribe in Peru in about 2012. And he came back full of beans, as it were, and said, we've got to do a festival called Medicine. And we had been hosting festivals at Waiting, but I had a lot of other things going on and couldn't sort of get my head around it. So we sort of parked it. And then 4 years later, I had my own experience sitting with the Yawanawa tribe and their chief, Nishiwaka and Putini. And I had a similar experience to him. And they invited me out to their homeland in Acre in Brazil. And so very excited, never been to the Amazon. So I went out to the Amazon and it became sort of clear that they were looking for support. And I was thinking, what could I do to support them? Well, I know we could hold a festival and maybe we could try and raise funds for their tribe and, amplify their culture. So I came back and phoned Ben and I said, do you remember that festival idea that you had? I think we should do it. And he took a bit of persuading, but we got there. And then the two of us gathered a team and we all gathered in sort of late 2016, maybe early 2017 and started the festival. I mean, effectively, it began with 150 people and the group that we brought together were of diverse interests, pulling in from music and medicine, the medicine world, as well as technical production and event production. But it was a really great group of 9 people, including Ben and me. And as a result of that, we ended up having the ambassadors gathering in 2019. And then we had the pandemic. And, suddenly it was like, oh, this isn't going to happen. And we had limited amount of funding. And so in 2020,
it got very tight as to whether we were going to be able to do it, because there were no gatherings. If you remember, it was the year when nothing was allowed to happen. But I was holding out that maybe the numbers were going to improve. And the date that we had booked in for the first festival was the end of August. And it was the last weekend of the summer holidays before all the kids went back. And there was a little bit of opposition, as you can imagine. It was not an easy decision to go forward. And we ended up consulting the ancient technique of I Ching, which is a Taoist dice throwing technique, which James Bridle described it as the earliest form of AI. And I think it was developed in the 7th century or something. And anyway, we consulted the I Ching. The I Ching, the person who was reading the I Ching said it was the strongest reading that he'd ever had in 20 years of doing the I Ching, saying that we had to go ahead with it. Like, somehow we managed to get the government, central government, to put out a press release in the beginning of August saying that Medicine Festival has to go ahead. I don't know where that came from, but that happened. And then the local authority, when they heard the quote from the central government Department of Culture, they said, we're going to have to do this. So we became the only festival that took place in 2020. And that was how inaugurated Medicine.
That was the first.
That was the first main festival. We had the ambassadors gathering, which is 150 people, just to sort of see whether, there was motivation to hold the event. And that was with a sort of wider group of people. And what came out of that was, a clear decision that we should proceed. And calling it Festival Medicine is obviously quite challenging. And calling it Festival Medicine in the pandemic.
Yes.
If we'd become a super spreader, which we didn't, thank goodness, it would have been probably curtains that we had quite a strict protocol on. And that was how we started.
Huh, amazing. And how big is it now?
So the festival's now about 10,000 people. And this year we're having a year off, 2026. We're having a bit of time just to really think about the mission, think about what we're doing.
And so the focus is very much on Indigenous sort of wisdom and medicine. Is that right?
Yeah, the focus is on what can be good medicine for people and planet, and inviting people to come and be the medicine in whatever form they feel. But we do amplify and showcase a lot of Indigenous culture, practice and wisdom and music. And so we bring Indigenous groups from all over the world. And it is an amazing thing to see because, there are so many practices that are just really out of our wheelhouse. And we've forgotten, what to do with so many things. And so to have these cultures which have these extraordinary, wonderful practices, and for them to showcase what they do, it's a real honor and a real privilege, actually. And there's no alcohol. So it was one of the first festivals to not have alcohol. And it's been a huge success. Because what it means is that at 2 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning, you might be going back to your tent, you have a conversation, and you're completely lucid and able to speak to someone and remember the conversation. And it's actually a game changer for us. And because there's quite a lot of, very carefully curated, very sacred music, it does require real sort of attention, focus, and respect. And I think with alcohol, that can go out the window.
Yeah. So 10,000 is pretty big, but will you keep it quite limited?
I don't know. I think it'll probably grow gradually. And then I think the idea is also we've had an extraordinary number of offers to hold medicine in different countries. So I think the idea is maybe we will do that, but all to be worked out. But I could see there being other medicine festivals in different places.
Yeah, that seems like a really nice idea.
Yeah.
Lovely. All right. Well, we look forward to hearing about it coming in 2026.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. The read-off changed.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. Actually, I've got a friend here who has been every year it's been on, I think. She loves it. Absolutely loves it. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about what POWER are trying to do and how they're trying to do it?
Yeah, so I think the aims of POWER are really to raise awareness and to enable access to people who need it for psychedelic medicine. And so I think, every week we know of people who are developing suicidal ideation and
suffer from very severe depression. And, for some people, nothing works. And, however much they try, they just can't get the medicine they need.
And can you just remind our listeners why they're denied access?
Well, they're denied because psilocybin resides in Schedule 1 Class A of the drugs misuse regulatory sort of toolbox, which basically means it's more restricted than heroin and cocaine, which, when you think about it, is absolutely extraordinary. I mean, I don't know of a single death that has been directly associated with the use of psilocybin in the UK. I think there was one in Holland where somebody fell off a balcony or something, but I'm not aware of a single one in the UK. And bearing in mind, that psilocybin is the active compound of the mushroom that grows on, in our fields and on our hillsides in the UK, and has been used for millennia by, people in this country for revelry, but also for healing. It seems extraordinary that we are restricting this and putting it in this box where nobody can get access to it.
It does seem bizarre to make a plant illegal in that way.
I was just going to say that's what we've been campaigning for at Drug Science, is the rescheduling of psilocybin, really focusing and pushing from that angle to improve the ability to do research on it. Because with Schedule 1 drugs, it makes it more restrictive from a research perspective as well, which can make it more challenging, and that has an impact on actually having access down the road as well, trying to have that research ready to then lobby for a better access for medical use, to at least start with medical use first. And really from your perspective and what you've learned from campaigning with PAR then, what do you think would finally try and get the government to change their stance on it?
Well, my experience in campaigning generally is that you want the media on side, and you want some probably really good personal case studies. And I think there's nothing more compelling for a politician to hear the story of somebody that, is having a really, really tough time, and their way of basically helping this person. But I think cultural awareness across the board is important too, and I think that's happening. I think every newspaper has featured positive stories about, including the Daily Telegraph, which has quite a lot on psilocybin. So, there's a lot of evidence out there. There's a lot of stories out there. It's just how one collates that and makes it compelling.
And what would be that tipping point? So I know with medical cannabis, you had the campaigning of parents, which really helped to finally push through the legislation there. But for medical psychedelics, which angle do you think would maybe be most appealing to the government? Obviously, there's looking at the use for PTSD for veterans, which has been used obviously in the States. But then would the UK maybe be more like aligned to looking at end of life anxiety or existential distress? And would that maybe kind of appeal to the public more? Like, what would your kind of view on that be?
From what I've seen with government, nothing is more appealing than safety.
No.
If we can get through to the Treasury about the enormous benefits that we might have, not only from the tax take, I suppose, of companies that are, developing these medicines, but also, the reduction in costs to the NHS, the huge societal benefits that would come from, better policy on psychedelic treatment.
I mean, Josh, you're right. You're onto something, because MDMA was used, wasn't it, for couples counselling?
Well, exactly.
So MDMA might be the drug for that.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there are so many ways that I think a government could benefit from changing its policy on this.
Absolutely. Hannah, have we had Sam Gandhi on the podcast?
Oh, good question. Maybe an original guest from when Dave was just doing the episodes. I think maybe one of the earlier ones. I know we've had Ros Watts talking about the importance of exactly what you said, medicine of community, the power of community and connectedness. And I thought that was really nice when you were talking about the name for the festival, medicine, and just how there's so many different medicines which you can bring in. I think that was such a nice analogy, rather than just being focused on plant medicine. But connectedness is, of course, what's coming through now a lot with research, just the importance of that for well-being and for positive outcomes.
And especially, I suppose, when, we see so much mental illness coming down the tracks, and, just seeing the impact of screens on kids, and it just feels like the time for psychedelics has come, actually.
Yeah, we no doubt we have a mental health crisis, and the current treatments that are available do not work for many, many people. I don't know if you've both seen the Mental Health of the World report.
No.
So they've been doing this since the pandemic. I think the fourth one came out last year. 2022 and 2023, the UK came last. So we came bottom for mental health, along with Brazil, weirdly, and South Africa. And I think Tanzania and a lot of African and South American countries were much better. And a lot of that, they reckon, is the community and the lack of community that we have.
Yeah. I mean, it speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it just shows sort of what an enormous problem we have.
I guess in the NHS, that will be a potential way forwards, because it would be very expensive to have one person, maybe for 8 hours, with a clinician and a psychologist, psychotherapist. So I can imagine, and I know there's some research now about the social cohesion. So did you find that you kind of kept in touch with the people that you had been with on that experience?
I really do, actually. And I think there's something about the follow-up and keeping people together. And, you go on this journey together, but you've all been there in the same space, and you've got this in common, this very extreme experience, which you've got in common. So it really does bring you together. And I think also it has the potential for people to have conversations afterwards, which, can enable huge breakthroughs, not only personally, but also with group issues. So I think the possibilities are immense, actually.
And I don't suppose you met any of your founders from Medicine Festival at any of your retreats, or were they independent of the retreats you've been on?
Well, so the founders of Medicine, the person who originally came up with the name Medicine Festivals was my friend Ben Christie, who I've known since I was 7 years old. And he started his journey before I did in 2012, I think. And he came back with this download that Medicine Festival was the way forward. I haven't, clocked that and gone on the journey, but I did, and then went to the Amazon and met with this tribe called the Yuanawa, and then came back thinking that we had to make this festival happen. And then we brought together a group of people who'd also been thinking similar things. I knew all of them, actually. And so when that happened, Ben and I sort of got together. We sort of basically pulled together the group of co-founders. And that was, yeah. And I'd worked with, Jenna, who's the general manager, I'd worked with on festivals before. And Dan Farrow, who was originally brought in, I'd been working with before. Zach Avery was a good friend who'd come into it. Moshi and George, I didn't know so well. They were more friends of Ben's. And Remy Olajoyegbe had come in as a friend of ours as well. And Jimena Paracha was the original person who actually brought me into contact with Yuanawa. So we had quite
That's a big team.
Yeah, there were 9 of us at the beginning.
Okay. Now, is it the only festival, Hannah, we were talking about this, that is alcohol free?
Yeah, initially it was against my better judgment. I thought we needed a bar. So how can you not have a bar? George Barker, to his credit, said, no, we've got to keep it alcohol free. And it was definitely the right decision. It's just magnificent having an event where everyone is clear-headed. And, it's just wonderful to see, even at like 2:00 in the morning, that people will have conversations and they can be very clear in those conversations. And the next day you remember that conversation, and you don't have any aggro or people overly loud or interrupting the musicians. And some of the work that we do at Medicine is extraordinary, very, very sacred work. And, sometimes you need that sort of quietness and reverence. And we had this year, we showcased the Ripple, or last year rather, 2024, we showcased the Ripples Connected, which was a group of Israelis and Palestinians who had been brought together by Lior Roseman and others. And we had, we had suffered terribly online as a result of, like many organisations, as a result of October the 7th, trying to, articulate our position on Israel and Palestine. There was a right old online storm going on. So we thought the best thing we could do would be to bring them together. And we had this very delicate performance by this group of Israelis and Palestinians who had come together through sitting with ayahuasca. And they did a 2-hour performance showing their experience of how they come together and become a team to, perform together. And if we'd had alcohol in that situation, it just could have been very, very awkward and tricky. So, yeah.
So that's really, really interesting that the Israeli group and the Palestinian group came together through drinking ayahuasca together.
I mean, it was one of the most powerful things that I've ever seen. And it was a real reminder as to what these incredible, incredible medicines can do. And knowing, the difficulty that these guys have gone through. And so knowing that this medicine can, work this wonder with this group of people is something to behold and a huge inspiration. The exciting thing also is that they then came back to London and they did a second performance at St. Cyprian's Church in London in November. And they've just finished at Davos. So they did a performance at Davos together. So that's exciting to see the trajectory of that group. And hopefully they will be a shining example to many people, for years to come as to, how to show a better way in a different way.
Now, just sort of going back to the lobbying, we have a new government. What's your sense? Have you had any meetings in Parliament with this new government at all?
Well, it sounds reasonably positive. I know that meetings have taken place with Dame Diana Johnson, and it's the Home Office which holds the key here. I think ideally you'd have the Treasury going, we can save money. You'd have the Health Department saying, we can improve the situation with, all of our offerings in the NHS, as well as potentially the benefits of frontline workers maybe being able to access these medicines to help them with stress. But fundamentally, it's the Home Office who holds the key because they see these medicines as, illegal, criminal substances, which is extraordinary when you think that, especially with psilocybin, you can go to the hillside and see them growing from the hillsides. So I think if we can get the Home Office on side, that's a big win. And I know that Timmy Davis has been doing some sterling work in engaging with Dame Diana Johnson. And there are certain MPs who are really, supportive as well, such as Charlotte Nichols. And the PAR campaign has been very active in sending messages and letters to MPs, to all constituencies. So I'm hoping that MPs will hear the call. And, you got to remember, we're not asking for this to be legal. We are literally just asking to move them out of Class A Schedule 1 into Schedule 2. And that would, open up huge opportunities for research. Why would we not want to research these compounds more when we can see so much benefit? I mean, Hannah, both of you might be, I don't know how many studies there have been on psilocybin, but I'm guessing in the hundreds. I know that there's been over 600 on ayahuasca alone. So how many there have been on psilocybin, I don't know. But, they point to us needing to know more. And the government could unleash this and, we could be best in class. We could, develop a system which could be an example to other countries. There are other countries that have experimented, such as Australia. We should be learning those lessons and improving on the model for access, in Oregon and Colorado and the States. And, we have such an extraordinary scientific community in the UK. And it seems a shame that we shouldn't be at the vanguard of this, really.
Completely, yeah. And so that's where places like Centre for Psychedelic Research, Imperial, researching, at the moment, different addictions. So looking into opioid addiction and gambling addiction, and then also obviously looking further afield now where there's going to be real world evidence. And it'd be great if the UK were able to get to a stage where maybe we can start collecting real world evidence once it gets to the point of being medicalised as well, and just build up the evidence base as much as possible, but really hopefully starting with the rescheduling first.
It's striking, isn't it, Hannah? Because before the podcast, we were talking about your work with opioids, and and I was talking during the podcast of my experience of seeing, the devastation across communities in America as a result of the war on drugs and how ineffective it's been, how disastrous it's been, actually. And so, the possibility that we might be able to develop access to these compounds, which could give so many people so much hope and help, it just seems extraordinary that any government should be restricting the possibility for more research.
Oh, absolutely. Especially in conditions of addiction where there's just such limited treatments at the moment. There's a real need to explore innovative approaches, which actually can be scaled up. We were talking earlier about group therapy and thinking about how these would be rolled out in the long term. And there's lots of already rational approaches of how this would be done. But really, it is lobbying the government, like you said, showing the economic benefit, which Joe has been involved in on a health economic analysis.
Yeah.
Really trying to get those papers and that evidence into the right hands. But I like the optimism you have for the new government. Yeah. And that's encouraging that maybe change is going to come in the next couple of years, especially as the evidence comes out of the UK. Obviously, it's not just Imperial. You've got King's also doing different trials in UCL. So we can hope that there'll be change soon, Joe.
Well, something that gives me a lot of optimism is the work that the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology have been doing on psilocybin treatment for various conditions. They've written some really beautiful, well-researched articles on that.
Yeah.
And actually their summary is due to come out quite soon. That a parliamentary office is taking this so seriously and conducting their own research of the evidence, I think is really, really important. And that for me, is one of the hopeful.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because it may be that it's civil servants in the Home Office who, bless them, have had probably issue after issue after issue with the press coming at them under-resourced for so many years. And the idea of opening any can of worms, to them might be just, really terrifying. I mean, they might be suffering PTSD themselves, actually. So, in some senses, I think they do hold the key. I saw with the hemp licensing, which I was involved in as a farmer, actually, we were involved with the campaign to try and change the licensing regulations with hemp. And we had some interactions with some of the Home Office officials, and they're really trying to do the right thing. It's just very difficult in that environment. I think it's a sort of a gentle, in some senses, a gentle process, but we do need to make as much noise as possible on the outside, and hopefully that the corridors will be able to.
Yeah, I mean, Hannah and I worked with animals in our career. And the Animal Scientific Procedures Act, that's also under the control of the Home Office. So all the rules and regulations about researching and using animals in research. And that has been very difficult, as well as, the use of controlled substances in research. And you're right about the interactions with the Home Office. They're very, very much under-resourced, and they are really trying to help. And I think it would be sensible to take those responsibilities out of the Home Office and put them. It never made sense for me to the animals, the legislation around animals with the Home Office. I would have thought that would be in science, technology, and then would you not have drugs in health? I would have thought.
It's the wrong place for them. 100%.
Yeah.
It's 100% the wrong place for them.
Yeah.
But I know how difficult it is for departments to give up responsibilities. And I saw that with hemp, actually. And there was
really
to try and get DEFRA to take responsibility. And in fact, actually, I spoke to two ministers from DEFRA in the last government who were convinced that it was going to move, and they were going to, go to the Cabinet Office, and they were going to move the regulation from the Home Office to DEFRA. And then it got to the Home Office, and the Home Office minister was convinced. I mean, this, it's like, okay, it's going to happen. And then we got to the civil servants, and actually, I'm really sorry, but it's just not. We'll talk about the art of the possible here, but I'm afraid it's not leaving the Home Office.
So it was like, okay, so it was interesting, wasn't it? You have the people who are the people's servants who are right at the top saying actually it needs to change, and then the civil servants saying no.
I wonder why not.
I think there was just concern about the parliamentary process of changing the responsibility and the complications of drafting the right wording and the amount of consultation that has to happen. I don't know. It seemed like nonsense to me. I mean, hemp is a wonder product, and again, is another thing that should be unleashed. But,
So are you not allowed to grow hemp?
well, you have to have a license. You did have to have a license that was renewed every year. And we were farming here, and we had a license to grow hemp for 3 years. And then we got turned down for an application for growing hemp in the same area. And the reasons for turning it down were we were too close to the atomic weapons establishment. We were too close to a traveller's site, and we were too close to a public footpath. So it was a risk to that maybe people at the atomic weapons establishment might end up smoking very strong cannabis, potentially. Maybe criminals might be encouraged to come closer to the atomic weapons establishment. Travellers could potentially grow a crop of cannabis inside the crop, maybe. And anyway, it was ridiculous. And so we went to the government and said, this is nonsense. Anyway, eventually they changed, actually. So now you can have a license and you don't have to renew it over 3 years, and they've relaxed their restrictions significantly, but it still is in the Home Office, not with DEFRA.
It's interesting they've relaxed the restrictions, though. That's good news.
It is, yeah. It's very positive.
Is it an easy crop to grow?
Different forms, sort of easy, and others that are less easy. Growing for fibre, which is often the materials. So, and straw hemp bales, for example, you can use as insulation. That's quite easy to grow. If you grow for seed, which could be breakfast cereals or the superfoods and hemp oil for cooking, that's much more difficult. But your farmers need to be able to experiment, and they need the flexibility to try different fields without having to go through the complicated renewal process. So they have made things easier. They've given us 3-year license now with the possibility of extending for a further 3 years. It gives us a bit of confidence that we can try some crops. So we're currently growing a number of trial crops to see what works on the ground here.
How interesting. I don't know the relationship between hemp and cannabis.
Well, hemp is cannabis.
Right.
But it's sort of low grade THC. So it's not cannabis that you can smoke and get high, as it were.
Yeah.
But it's a fiber which we have grown, forever, basically enabled the empire to do what the empire did by producing sails and clothing. And if you go to Suffolk, there's a huge number of places which are called Hempville or Hempton or Hempcrete or Hempley. And so, it was a staple crop. And I believe that there's a myriad of uses for it. But I believe that there's a professor at Cambridge who's patented a replacement for the lithium battery.
Oh, wow. He'll be rich.
It also extracts more carbon out of the atmosphere than any other plant apart from bamboo.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. So it's an enormously...
environmental impact too, a positive one.
Huge.
Yeah. An incredible plant then.
Yeah.
So Josh, I guess we're coming towards the end, and we want to kind of think if there's anything you want to share about Medicine Festival. Is it going to be on this year?
Well, Medicine Festival is having a fallow year this year. We've done 7 years of planning and being together and trying to kind of, build it. And so we've had a year. We're going to have a year off this year. It's been 5 years of actually holding the festival since 2020. And we've got some exciting plans for the future. But this year is a year of consolidation and stock. And then we're coming back next year in 2026.
So yeah, super exciting. And it's an amazing thing in that it's really captured the imagination of a lot of people, especially internationally. We had over 100 nationalities at the last one. And it's an extraordinary sight to see lots of different Indigenous groups, because at the heart of this actually is preserving Indigenous wisdom. And it's amazing to see so many Indigenous groups being able to talk about their culture in one place. It's a real it makes you feel very hopeful for the world.
Yeah, I saw that on your lineup. It's very diverse. You have lots of different groups of people talking, and then the workshops and the activities. Are you able to share anything exciting for people to look forward to the year when you come back? Or is it very much the plans to just take their steps to get there?
I mean, it will be, as ever, a smorgasbord of international culture from around the world. But we haven't announced any lineup, so it's too far away at this stage. But it will be an amazing event, as always.
Sounds wonderful.
It is amazing. I mean, please come, actually. And we do other events, actually, here at Wazing. We do an event called Solstice, which happens over the summer solstice, and we'll be doing one called Equinox over the autumn equinox.
So lovely.
We are trying to hold events which sort of celebrate our seasonal moments. And yeah, they're wonderful things, actually. So we're doing more and more. The place is called Wazing Estate, and the website's wazing.co.uk. We hold concerts here as well, which we're hopefully soon going to announce the lineup, which will be very exciting. But everything we do is done through the prism. As a result of my journey, is done through the prism of nature connectedness, and how this amazing tract of land can, be of most use and most positive benefit to as many people as possible.
Well, we look forward to that. So what is next for you then?
Well, I'm actually writing a book. The book is on the subject of maps. My family, who brought Wazing in the 18th century, were map publishers. They actually had a monopoly on something called the English Pilot, which was a book of sea charts. And there were 6 volumes. And from about 1680 to about 1800, that was their business. They sold navigational information, of which the English Pilot was their sort of top seller. And I didn't know the history of this at all. And it was only as a result of that trip to the Amazon, where the chief asked me about the history of the land, that I actually started to pay attention to it, because my mum had never told me. She said, I thought that they were involved in book selling and might have sold maps on the side. But that was it. And there was no history, because the house had burnt down in 1945. So all the papers had gone. So one day I found myself going to a book fair in London, and I saw the family name on a map. And I asked the person selling the map about the firm, and he gave me this extraordinary history, which basically said that they had the information, the navigational information for the British Navy in the 18th century. And they were pretty much the key provider of navigational information. And that was maps. It was also, gunnery techniques, rigging manuals, how to behave on ship. It was the almanacs, how to study the stars. They published both sides of the longitude debate. So they were really, they had that sort of grip on the information. And so that really made me want to find out more, especially after the chief had said, you need to find out about the land. And so that sent me a bit of an odyssey to try and work out what those maps did. And so I'm currently writing, or attempting to write a book on it. And then maybe what are the new maps? And that obviously brings us into our territory of, what happens when you dissolve the boundaries and, you dissolve your identities and you come back renewed, which can often be the case with psychedelics. So it feels to me that the maps that we need now are very different to the maps they needed in the 18th century. And so I'm going to be trying to look at that as well.
That's a nice kind of combination of, really. Isn't it interesting, though, that there was nothing in your family home? No history about that at all?
There was nothing. There was one map in the Louvre of a map of Madagascar, and that was it. And also, they were called Mountain Page. So the acronym was MAP.
Really?
And even more than that, I'm quite into this sort of etymology thing, but they mounted expeditions in a very male way, and they'll be help the colonizers. And they did it with the pages of the map. And the company was called Mount and Page because the two families were called Mount and Page. So there's a very curious name to the family business.
Yeah. Really interesting history. Gosh.
All to be discovered, because until recently I didn't know anything. Neither did any of my family.
Isn't it extraordinary, learning about it from the guy at the book fair?
Yeah.
Amazing. So the history is there.
The history is there. Yeah.
Unearthing it all.
It's actually called Unearthing the Map.
Yeah.
I've managed to find 4 volumes of the English pilot, and there's 2 more to complete. So I've got to get Africa, which is very rare, and I've got to get Asia, which Captain Cook had on his trip to Australia. And then if I get those 2, then I've got the whole collection, which should be pretty amazing. The collection of sea and navigation information from the 18th century.
Yeah. Great. Well, when do you think it will come out?
I had absolutely no idea. But hopefully, I'm giving myself 2 years, and I've written 25,000 words, and I'm having conversations with publishers at the moment. So hopefully that will be positive. And then I need time to go and visit some of the places on the map to see what the impacts of Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah, and give back, I guess, proceeds of the book, give back to those communities and the Medicine Festival.
Yeah.
That's a lovely way to do it.
Yeah, well, that's what Medicine Festival does give. All profits goes to Indigenous whites.
And so the profits from medicine go to this one particular community in Brazil?
No. They're actually doing phenomenally well now. They've got money coming in from, a lot of places, and they're very active actually, and, doing a really great job at supporting strengthening their community. No, it goes to lots of other communities now, so it's a much broader base from Australia to India and Africa. We're given almost £100,000, and I think hopefully that will just increase.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to see these communities coming to the land here at Wasing, because it was bought with the profits of the map business.
Yes, it's a very, very nice way of giving back. Yeah, so very best of luck with it, Josh. Oh, lovely. Well, thank you very much. Hannah and I have had a lovely time talking to you, Josh. And very best of luck with your campaigning. We definitely need people like you to get the law changed, and all the work that you're doing with nature and connectedness and hemp. There's so much going on. So thank you very much, Josh.
Amazing. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much, guys, for having me on.
Thanks so much, Josh.